Hi class, this is part 2 of our postmodernism conversation, or lecture. We ended with this conceptual art ism, I guess, conceptualism, also known as idea art, and the idea that the shift where the art residing in the object or outside the object transforms into maybe the idea becoming more important than the object itself is kind of presented to us, or whatever idea is set in motion might be more important. So one of the more pivotal works in thinking about conceptual art and its introduction into this conversation around postmodernism is a work by a young artist at the time, Joseph Kosuth, and this is called 1 and 3 Chairs. What's important, this is from 1965, what's important for you to consider when looking at this work, and I think what Joseph Kosuth was intending was that you would start to question where chair happens. And so we have a object of a chair, right? The three-dimensional object. We have a rendering, 2D rendering of that object as a photograph. And then we have a print of a dictionary definition of chair. So we have these kind of ways of considering and thinking about representation that's pretty philosophical and complex. Now, what's critical for you to consider and think about while looking at this work is where does chair happen for you? If you were going to point out where chair is, where is it happening here? Is it happening in the picture or in the language? In the object, the photo, or the language? And one of the things that Joseph Kosuth is doing for us is illustrating that chair happens in us. So we all come to understanding chair in a subjective way. So if you close your eyes and think chair, do you primarily come to understanding chair as an object, as a representation, as an image, or do you think about how you define chair through language? So he does this over and over again. Every time this work is presented, it's presented as the exact same artwork. So if you'll notice that the 1 and 3 Chairs, the title is exactly the same, 1965. The date never changes, so even if it's exhibited in 1980, the work and even if the chair, the printout, the photo, all of those things change. Necessarily, the concept never changes, and so he sees them as identical work. So, where does chair happen, right? Where does it reside in the object? Is chair something I carry around in me through images in my mind of a chair, experiences with chairs, etc.? Is it because I have a definition I carry around in my head? How do I identify something as chair? Kosuth is putting under pressure our interpretation of objects and images. This pressure on interpretation asks us to consider where's the meaning of the thing. Why do we call this chair? Is it in the form, right? That formalism question. Is it in the language or in images? Have we simply agreed and decided that a thing is a chair? Would humans from a distant past think of it as chair? things to recognize is there's, in the traditional sense, not much skill. He didn't make the chair from scratch, a three-dimensional object. The photograph isn't necessarily meant to be seen as aesthetically pleasing or as a well-crafted photograph. There's no interest in beauty or expression. It seems pretty anti-aesthetic. Something's withheld, though, and we've talked about how this is a key for us. He uses this to get us to ask ourselves, what is the artwork asking of me? Are we looking at an object of chair, photo of chair, dictionary definition of chair? Where's the chair? Where's the art? What if there's different chairs? Maybe I'm carrying the idea of chair around in me rather than it residing in the object. So I'm just reiterating. So if you'd like, you can read through this. This is going to be in the presentation. But I'm going to, there's also some audio of him talking about it if you're interested. But I'm going to move on so we can get a little bit more grounding in some conceptual artworks. This is a video I'd like you to watch on John Baldessari. It's a brief history of John Baldessari, narrated in a really fun way, but Baldessari is going to be a good example of someone who is challenging traditional concepts of how you create representation, and is doing a lot of similar things as Kossuth, often with a lot of humor involved as well. We've got a work here by Yoko Ono called Cut Piece 1964, where Yoko Ono will be on stage and has a pair of scissors sitting next to her, fully clothed, and she invites the audience to come up and use the scissors in whatever way they see fit. And what ends up happening is people start to slowly cut her clothes off. This becomes kind of, again, an extension of performance art, and this the work starts to become, again, bringing in the world and its kind of social, relational aspects. So this becomes a social experiment on ways of enacting violence, maybe toward other humans, especially women, by just the presentation of an object and the figure of a woman. This is artwork by Daniel Buren. I'd like you to notice he creates for decades and decades these artworks that are stripes. And in this case, what's profound about this work is that the artwork leaves the gallery and goes outside the gallery, or is outside the gallery and comes in. So this kind of traditional convention of art being interior or in a space deemed as a place for viewing art, he's kind of breaking convention there and asking a question where art is supposed to or required to happen. This is Jenny Holzer. She creates these large billboard signs, and this is in the 80s. They're all explicitly using language to ask questions, ask concerns, or pose concerns. Nothing, again, aesthetic per se as we look at these, but they're all thoughts. Thoughts that ask you or provoke more thoughts. This is Lawrence Weiner. This is a artwork called As Far as the Eye Can See. He's someone who will often use language as a way or a vehicle of talking about some of the same ideas as One in Three Chairs. In this case, what you're reading as far as the eye can see is not what you're seeing. So you're looking at and thinking about as far as you can see, but you're restricted by this wall that's stopping you. And so there's a conflict or a juxtaposition happening with what you're reading and thinking and what you're seeing. We talked about Adrian Piper. if you looked into more of her work, she's often doing these performances that are also teasing out the racial and gender complications and issues she's interested, identity politics she's interested in. In this one, she stuffs a napkin in her mouth and out in public tries to capture people's looks, right, and how they perceive her doing this performance, which she equates to how they look at her anyway. It's just an explicit way of documenting what they're doing. We talked about this, or looked at this. This is a self-portrait exaggerating my Negroid features. Again, her teasing out these complications of her identity as someone who can pass, right, as either African American or white. She makes a series of these business cards that in a performance way she hands out. If you want to read through that, it's teasing out some of the same ideas that we've seen her discuss. In the 60s, we start to see this idea of relationalism take hold, and the idea that an artwork can be an event starts to evolve. We'll talk a little bit more about this if we have some time, but this becomes the underpinnings of a lot of pretty radical experimental works that starts to see social situations or the social arenas of our lives as a form and something that can be manipulated like any other material, like paint or like clay or stone or whatever it is you want to equate to traditional art materials. This is Alan Capro, who is very well known for doing this kind of work. So in this, the courtyard, this is an event where they build this kind of crazy tower, but the documentation of the event is kind of seen like a performance of sorts. This is Michael Asher, Untitled, 1974. This is a artwork where the artwork is removing the wall that typically, in this gallery specifically, closes off the office of the gallery and the storage of the gallery from the rest of the space. So kind of a Wizard of Oz moment, pulling back the curtain. Again, another kind of analytical view of how we think about representation. This is called Causes of Death by John Hilliard. So what you're seeing here is behind this is the same exact photograph repeated four times, but each one is cropped differently. So this one is cropped this way to include the water, so it says drowned. This one's called crushed, because it shows the underground here. This one's called burned, because it shows fire. And this one's called fell, because it shows the bridge. And then we're going to move into next week thinking about Warhol, so I'll hold off on talking about this one, because we're going to dive a lot more into Warhol. If you want to dive in a little bit there, you can. A couple more things I wanted to bring up here, because they're going to become tangential in a way, but architecture we're not going to talk about too much in here, but although it also has a very significant postmodernist movement that is important to acknowledge. This is the Pompidou, which is a contemporary art museum in Paris. And one of the things to notice from this image is the way that architecture starts to consider or think about revealing its own making or how it's constructed. So this looks kind of incomplete. It looks like it has this skeletal architecture that isn't covered or doesn't have any coverage. If you're looking over here, they even show the ventilation, the water pipes, and all that kind of stuff. So everything's not hidden. The kind of inner workings of the structure of building itself, and that's a value of postmodernism, is to kind of reveal and not be illusionistic, right? And so you see that happening in architecture. Mies van der Rohe is a good example of that happening, or the early motivations for that. And we see that a lot in Chicago, where the structure that is the inner structure of the building is revealed on its exterior, and there's not a covering of that. So you see a lot of windows and a lot of ways of seeing interior spaces, as well as a way of thinking about that that ideology. We'll talk more about Jeff Koons and Maria Abramovich later in the course, so if you want to get a little introduction to some of this work, that would be fine as well. We'll do this independently. I'll assign those separately, and then we're going to also watch this as we move on through the semester, keep moving on through the text ways of seeing. So don't feel too constrained to looking at all this right now, because I also want you to start thinking about some of the homework you have outside of this. So again, I'll come back to a few of these issues, but the main underpinning here, where did that go? Sorry, flipping pretty quickly. This is going to be your kind of visual, just like we used the Eiffel Tower as a good way of understanding modernism. This is a good way of understanding conceptual art and postmodernism, and I think the other would be a good example for us would be Piper here. So this one wasn't nearly as long as part one, but there are a lot of videos embedded in this one that if you're interested and want to get introductions to some of this, go ahead and watch. I'll assign some of those videos as well later, and I hope you guys are all staying safe.